Hi and welcome, I'm AnewZ and you are watching Context. Russia has proposed holding the second round of direct peace negotiations with Ukraine in Istanbul on June 2nd. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that their team will present a memorandum at the talks outlining Moscow's view on how to overcome what he called the root causes of the war. Ukraine has, however, already sent their own document, according to the country's defense chief and negotiating team leader Rustem Umerov, who called on Russia to deliver their document before the talks. After the first round of direct negotiations in more than 3 years was held on May 16th, resulting in the largest prisoner swap yet, US President Donald Trump spoke to his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin and then said their call went very well. What followed was a series of the largest ever Russian aerial assaults on Ukraine, after which Trump called out Putin, saying he had gone absolutely crazy, and more recently that he's playing with fire. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Berlin for talks with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and the two announced a deal on long-range weapons production in Ukraine. On the latest surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war and prospects for a ceasefire, we're talking with Maria Zolkina of the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, coming to us from Warsaw, political analyst Stefan Blank joining us from Washington, and professor and coordinator of international studies at the State University of New York, Ivani Vasoler. Welcome, thank you all for being with us. Now let's start with the proposed second round of direct peace talks. Moscow is yet to deliver what are basically its demands to end the war in its memorandum. Kyiv sent its own and is calling for the Russians to do the same ahead of the talks. Maria, would the second round of talks be able to produce any substantial progress if Moscow's views on a future peace deal are not known beforehand?
Hello. I wouldn't expect the breakthrough at this round of negotiations. I think this is the stage when both sides are formulating in written their starting positions. Let's say we all know where Ukraine and Russia stands here diplomatically, what are the requests of one side to another. However, if we speak about the memorandum which are going to be presented to each other by both sides, so this will be the most the highest possible demands on both sides, in Moscow and Kyiv at this stage, and I wouldn't expect that at these talks, if they really happen next week, we will have any kind of compromise rather than exchange of positions from where both Kyiv and Moscow with kind of mediation from Turkey and US will be moving or not moving forwards to each other to reapproach the positions of each other.
Kremlin has said the details of their memorandum will not be discussed publicly, but reportedly the document contains a request to Western leaders to pledge in writing that NATO will not enlarge further to the east, effectively barring Ukraine from joining the alliance. Not only Ukraine, but there's also Georgia, Moldova, other former Soviet republics. Ivani, would you say that the lack of NATO's written guarantees could be an actual deal breaker for Moscow, or is this just negotiating tactics?
Well, it's part, apparently, of the demands that the Kremlin will take to the meeting Monday. And when the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, talks about the root causes of the conflict, obviously the NATO question is one of the root causes. And so it's going to be, from my perspective, a very difficult negotiation. And this is generate a great deal of concerns here in the United States, particularly coming from the White House, considering that President Trump would like to see progress in these negotiations.
What are your thoughts on this? Do you believe that NATO would even consider giving out such guarantees that would end its open door policies? And what would that bring to the mentioned countries that are further east?
I don't think NATO can or will give such a guarantee. And I don't think that it would be acceptable to Ukraine either. 3 years of war have shown that the only way Ukraine is secure is if it's a member of NATO. Russia has tried to use this war to force NATO to stop expanding, but it is, if anything, shown why Ukraine needs to be a member of NATO. And I don't think that this is going to be a point that NATO can agree to. Now, that may be a deal breaker for Moscow, but the fact remains that because of its aggression, it is proven why Ukraine needs to be in NATO.
Well, some of the other provisions reportedly include lifting of some Western sanctions and resolving the issue of frozen Russian assets. Maria, would you think that those asks are realistic if a ceasefire would be offered in exchange?
Speaking about the feasibility of what Moscow really wants, so I would say that they do understand that there is something more feasible and more realistic on the one hand, and something which is much less realistic politically and practically on the other hand. So lifting of the sanctions and proceeding with the idea to have access at some point to the assets which were frozen, the Russian assets which were frozen. I think this is something which is considered by Moscow to be more realistic for them to reach within the negotiations, and not necessarily in negotiations with Ukraine, but basically in negotiations with US, who is, according to Moscow position, is going to push European Union countries, which is not an easy task and not as easy as Russia thinks, to decide on returning at least incrementally those assets at some point to Russia. But politically, the idea about a kind of veto on NATO decisions, especially the reverse decisions, is not possible in my opinion. And I don't believe that there is no one in Moscow really believing that NATO who takes decisions anonymously. So there should be not just a compromise, there should be a consensus of all member states to decide that all the previous decisions regarding Moldova, regarding Ukraine, about their future membership should be now abandoned and forgotten. This is technically is not possible simply because Ukraine was not formally, verbally promised the membership perspective. Ukraine is already an applicant country. However, the formal procedure of starting the accession, which starts with invitation, hasn't been opened. So I don't see any possibility that the member states like Baltic states, Finland, Sweden, even Western European states will agree on any formalization of the pausing of this process. Even not to speak about the reverse character is not simply possible. The maximum here, what Moscow can get out of these negotiations, is a political promise from Donald Trump that until Donald Trump is the president, there will not be movement in terms of membership of Ukraine in NATO. However, this will still be practically, for obvious reason, an official priority for Ukraine. And in addition to that, Russia doesn't speak about this a lot, but they don't think just about NATO membership. They do want the restrictions on Ukraine's defense capacities, meaning some restrictions on the number of the Ukrainian army, the military aid and military production in Ukraine on the one hand, and they still want a kind of veto out of these negotiations on foreign policy decisions, because if not NATO, Ukraine has no restrictions to start establish any defense security alliances which will be new and will be out of NATO on bilateral or multilateral basis, like with UK, France, Germany, and we do have created a framework for this. Ukraine has around 30 security bilateral agreements with the states who have been supporting Ukraine since 2022 with military aid and finance. So I don't think that the complexity of these issues is not understood by Russia. However, they do count on political promises from US that Donald Trump will do everything to restrict the rapprochement between the idea of membership in NATO and Ukraine.
Ivani, what are your thoughts on any sanctions relief, specifically from the U.S. In exchange for a ceasefire?
The question of sanctions has been marked by several contradictory statements, including from President Trump. Recently, what he said after the tragic attacks of Russia and Ukraine is that Putin was acting like crazy and that he could intensify the sanctions. But a few hours later, he said that, I believe that I don't want to do that because this only is going to complicate more the problem that we are dealing with. So it is unclear what will be the position in the United States with relation to lifting the sanctions or increasing the sanctions. It's important to keep in mind that the Congress of the United States that is led by Republicans, therefore they are allies of President Trump. Yet some of these Republicans have a tough position against Russia. And recently, one of the most influential Republican senators, Lindsey Graham, is talking about imposing new sanctions on Russia. This from the perspective of the Senate of the United States. And Senator Graham, has developed a resolution together with a Democrat senator to increase the sanctions. So the situation here about what to do in relation to sanctions punishments to Russia is very fluid. And obviously, the President of the United States has always the final say in general in terms of foreign policy, but not necessarily he would have the support of at least some of his allies in the Congress.
Yes, Trump did mention he would give about 2 weeks to see if Putin is serious about peace. If not, he will act differently. Stefan, Ivani just mentioned a bill pushed by Graham that would also introduce massive secondary sanctions and tariffs of 500% on countries doing business with Russia. Would you say that that might be the correct move going forward if any progress isn't made?
I think it's the correct move going forward, even if progress is made, because it forces the Russians to negotiate in good faith. The combination of increased sanctions and of continuing and even increased military aid from both the United States and Europe to Ukraine is the stick that would force the Russians into a negotiation. And what's more, there should be no sanctions relief unless there is a ceasefire. And Moscow so far has shown no interest in a ceasefire. Putin has said he can win the war by conventional means, and he's not interested in a ceasefire. What he's interested in is getting Ukraine out of NATO and out of Europe without having to pay a price for it. So I don't expect these talks to go anywhere.
We've heard an interesting plan announced by Germany and Ukraine to jointly produce long-range weapons on Ukrainian soil. We've heard Friedrich Merz earlier saying that there are no longer any range restrictions on weapons provided to Kyiv by its Western allies. And in an interview following Zelensky's visit, he didn't rule out sending German-made missiles to Ukraine. Maria, what do you make of that? Could this be possibly opening the door to sending Taurus missiles to Kyiv?
There is a high political expectations from new coalition in Germany, who seems to be more hawkish than the previous one, where Social Democrats still tried to be softer at some points and tried to avoid crucial, sensitive decisions. So they didn't want to be to be icebreakers when it came to taboos in certain weapons supplied to Ukraine, and always follow decisions from US or UK. So we do expect that there might be some improvements in terms of bravery, let's say political bravery here from new coalition in Germany. However, the scheme about the joint production on Ukrainian soil, in my opinion, not only in case with Germany, but in case with other partners of Ukraine in the West, will be incrementally gaining more and more weight and will be more and more frequently used on the ground. As of now, the facilities in European countries especially, they simply are not working on a wartime rails, let's say, while the Ukrainian-based production, local one, is adaptive, flexible. People are working in a different way, adapting to new circumstances, and this is much more logical to invest money in local productions, given the flexibility of people on the ground, to improve, to organize the whole process and leave it transparent just in terms of money, to avoid any accusations of misusage of the funds. So from this point of view, longer range missiles, longer range drones, in my opinion, will be one of the top priorities for Ukraine to be produced on the ground. And this is, like, so to say, Danish proposal, Danish scheme to invest money rather than produce it domestically somewhere in Europe and just send the final product to Ukraine.
Ivani, what is your sense of the messages coming out of Berlin? As Maria mentioned, the previous SPD-led government was reluctant to deliver long-range missiles to Kyiv, and that party is now a major coalition partner of Merz's CDU. Do you believe that there has been enough of a change of course in Berlin?
Certainly, it's very different from what happened with the previous chancellor. The new German chancellor seems to be much more decided to take the lead in relation to the position of Europeans pro-Ukraine. Not only he mentioned this joint production of missiles with investments of millions and millions of dollars, but also he mentioned that he is going to make sure, or to make everything possible, to keep the Nord Stream pipelines closed. So these pipelines are the ones that transport natural gas from Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea, and this would be keeping these pipelines closed means monetary losses for Russia. Certainly is a change in relation to the previous government of Germany.
Stefan, what can you tell us about the European allies of Kyiv? As of now, we've heard obviously the messages from Berlin. We see the coalition of the willing still discussing the details of a peacekeeping force in the event of a future peace deal. How much have the Europeans stepped up since that initial US pause in aid?
Well, I don't think you're going to see a Franco-British peacekeeping force. I think they tried that and they found it's too difficult at present. But there is going to be increased Franco-British support for Ukraine. We see a Franco-Polish entente coming into play as well, which will lead to more support for Ukraine, and increased British defense spending, which some of which will go to Ukraine as well. So we see quite a dramatic transformation, although it's in its early stages, taking place in Europe's relationship to its own security and that of Ukraine.
And Maria, I want to hear your thoughts on this. How do you estimate the European contribution in Ukraine's war effort?
Unfortunately, Ukraine has lost the moment when they had to restart military production capacities. So as of now, if there is a decreased amount in US support, which is the most realistic scenario as of now, so we will have the problem with but this will not be catastrophic, I would say, because the nature of the war has changed dramatically, and now it's not about Bradley or Leopard tanks or even longer range missiles only. This is mainly about air defense on the one hand, sea defense on the other hand, and drones on from the third point of view. So nothing will be, just leading to catastrophe, even if this year we will see significant changes in support from US. However, the approaching NATO summit will show us how the redistribution of responsibilities might go on between US on the one hand and European members of NATO on the other hand. I think that political pressure from Donald Trump will make certain number of European NATO member states increase their defense expenditures on a national level. And this will partially help to decrease the tensions between Washington and the continental Europe. But I agree with Stefan that on a national level, Brits and French are really having political obstacles in front of them, because the mission and deployment of the mission to Ukraine and even giving Ukraine the military support is now will be on their shoulders mainly. However, they still trying to keep Donald Trump in the room in order to avoid US political or military withdrawal from European security architecture.
When it comes to the European security architecture, you mentioned the newly pushed defense spending goals. Ivani, what do you make of everything that's happening in Europe right now when it comes to the Rearm Europe initiative, when it comes to many of European states saying they are willing to bump up their defense spending to 5% of GDP? Has the European security structure changed? Do you expect it to change drastically to deter any possible future Russian assault?
It's very difficult to say, I think, even though because the European countries, they have their own problems. It's very difficult to get to a unified vision about what to do. Even in relation to Ukraine, but also in relation to NATO. Certainly, some of them already made the commitment, and some are doing, increasing their contributions to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But it's difficult to say, at least short term, where all this is going. It's not an easy task. The fact is that since 1949, when NATO was created, we have had this security architecture of Europe essentially protected or guaranteed by the United States. And now, with a new administration in US, the fact is the second term of President Trump. In his first term, he already put this type of pressure that Europeans should increase their contribution, and now more so. How the European Union will lead with this, again, is difficult because there is not at this point at least, unifying vision about what they should do.
And Stefan, would you say that the recent experiences with the U.S. since Donald Trump returned to the White House have been maybe a wake-up call for the European Union. Do you think that in some foreseeable future they will be able to arm themselves enough to deter any possible aggression?
In the first case, certainly Trump has been a wake-up call to Europe, not just the European Union. But as Ivani said, it's by no means clear that Europe will be able to defend itself anytime soon. Anytime soon, actually, would be quite impossible. It will take several years to see a genuine European defense. Right now, what you have is NATO, and that's the only unified command and control structure in existence in Europe. Otherwise, we would be seeing individual states helping Ukraine, but that's not a European defense.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That's all we had for you in this edition of Context. Do stay tuned to AnewZ.